Then we get to the top three, of course, LAT, Atlanta, and OpTic. I think the team that everyone is excited about is the new team. That's LAT. They bring in this super team. Like it's undeniable that this is one of the greatest on paper Call of Duty rosters of all time. They put two MVP candidates together in Scrap and Hydra. They bring in Envoy, bring back Envoy from Toronto, bring him back to LAT where he won a world championship. And then they add that to Ghosty, who we both believed was like on the cusp of being an all-star last season, being one of the best AR players in the entire CDL, despite, like you mentioned earlier, LAT was up and down. They were going through a roller coaster for most of that season. So where are you looking? What are you looking at with LAT in particular? What are you thinking about as they go into what they hope will be another championship season?
Yeah, I mean, that's just like the question. I feel obviously there was the early season lands where they won the Quezon tournament, I believe, at the start of this season. And so it's really just like, how good is this team going to be, and are they able to live up to those lofty expectations? Like, we've already heard like Nadeshot saying on stream he took a pay cut to make this roster happen. Like, a lot of shit went into this team putting it together, and if they aren't successful, then that's like, just like, what the heck's going on here? So it's almost like a just like, how good are they actually going to be question, not like a what are they capable of, or anything like that. Like, it is championship or bust for this team basically, and championships are expected at the end of the day. How many will they deliver, I guess, is the question you can ask. I guess in terms of a little bit more specific, I just think we kind of mentioned it on Monday. We were talking about Envoy and just statistically underperforming last year. Like, what is he capable of this year? Is he going to have a bounce back season statistically? The dynamic between Hydra and Scrap, like we've talked about it on some of these other teams, like there's only so many kills on the map. Is like them being on the same team going to affect their numbers? Will they actually care about that if they're winning? But if they're losing, is that going to be something like, it's like, oh, I got less kills, yada yada, going to be some bickering there? I don't know. And then for me, Ghosty, the X Factor, I mentioned it when we talked about this roster actually coming together. We have seen him in both roles now. We've seen him be on that OpTic team where he was coming from Challengers, dropping 1.4 KD. He slid into that OpTic team in NW2. Wow, I don't know why I was having a tough time with that. Slid into the OpTic team there when he got his start in the CDL, and he wasn't dropping a 1.4 because that's just not what they needed. They needed somebody to fill in the gaps and do the dirty work. But then this past year on LAT, we see him be the superstar Ghosty who's capable of dropping a 1.3 KD or higher. So now kind of expecting him to fill in the role on this team now where he's playing with two world champions and two MVP caliber players, and he's not going to be the guy expected to drop a 1.3. But if he's still able to do that and still able to show the superstar potential while filling the gaps for this squad, the sky's the limit for this team, really.
Yeah, and I think that's the most interesting thing is just how toxic a championship or bust team can be, and not like necessarily the players, but the environment around them, the expectation that, okay, like you won a few majors, that's cute, go win champs. And that's incredibly hard. That's very difficult. Look at how I guess the scene and maybe we have viewed Atlanta FaZe's season the last few years, since they won the world championship in what was that, 21, and they completely dominated that season, and then they kind of silver surfed through 22, and we were like, what's wrong with FaZe? But they were the number one team in the regular season. They were always a championship contender. And then last season, them getting, I think, whatever, 6th place at champs is like, oh my God, what is wrong? Like, this is the worst thing that can possibly happen. And they still got the number 1 seed at champs. It was just they did not perform when they needed to perform. And that's really tough on some teams. So I'll be very interested to see how LAT with this new team. These guys haven't played together. Obviously, Envoy and Scrap have, but this most of this team has not played together, and I think that'll be really interesting. Talking about more win or bust teams, you have to think about FaZe. This is a team that, like I just mentioned, underperformed at champs last season. I think it was the first time they hadn't made grand finals, or no, they hadn't made it into the top 3 of champs since the CDL started. But they've been the number 1 seed heading into champs every season in the CDL's existence. They've won 3 out of 5 MVPs. They are some of the, we talked about it last year before champs. If they won another title, is this the greatest trio of all time? Is this the greatest duo of all time? Those are the kind of conversations that they're in. So what are you looking at with FaZe as we get into the 2025 season?
Yeah, I think the main thing for me is really just Draza's role on this team, and just the narrative around Draza is like every year for the past couple years, FaZe has decided to make one roster change. It was always usually a change at the AR position, whether it was Arcides to Slasher, Slasher to Draza, and obviously there's some like debate about like Draza coming in as a flex and Celia moving to main AR, yada yada. But they decided after the champs struggles, but they win Esports World Cup, they decided to stick with Draza, which I think has to be the first time since they won champs with Arcides, and they kept Arcides for the following year, and then they obviously made the switch after that to Slasher. So it's been at least a couple years now since they decided to stick with the same roster for the following season. Like Draza just has to prove that he can be the key piece for this squad to go back to the championship aspirations. And I don't think aspirations is the right word, because like you said, like when you're in the conversation of best duo and best trio possibly of all time, those you always have championship aspirations. It's another case where Atlanta expects to win championships and multiple championships this year. There have been questions around Celium's play style. Does Celium play too much for stats? I feel like that's been a
He's new
big narrative
Dashy.
around him. Um, Obviously, I think very highly of Cell, and I think it's I don't know. I feel like that's always just gonna be the way he plays. Is he's really good and he gets a lot of kills. So like, why would he completely reinvent himself? But
Yeah.
also at the same time, he feels like the type of player, like he's not super outspoken. But everything you hear from the guy when he does interviews and stuff is about winning and trying to perform well. And I feel like if someone like Crowder tried to talk to him about his play style or something, it was like, hey, maybe we do a little bit of less of this and a little bit more of this, he would be like, oh yeah, I'm going to do that because it helps the team. Um, so yeah, I guess keeping an eye on those ARs there and seeing how they continue to play is going to be a big key for Atlanta. Feel like last year, I think if I'm thinking for the All Star team, like the only FaZe guy who wasn't on the All Star team was a BZ, and obviously all the long time Ego Chall podcast listeners know how highly I think of a BZ. So maybe like another narrative or storyline here around FaZe is what can we see out of a BZ, or expect out of him this year. And then obviously you got Simp, the reigning MVP. There was a little bit of chatter there at champs when Hydra was saying that MVP was mine and all that. So is Mr. Lair going to be able to prove that he deserved MVP, which I think that's kind of just silly at that point, because obviously everybody knows what he's capable of too. So I'm kind of yapping right now, but yeah, not a lot of specific questions for FaZe really. I just feel like it's going to be um, interesting to see what they are able to do to try and just move on from last year as a unit and improve and build off of 2024 and fresh start in 2025 with the same boys. Are they able to get past some of those demons that they had last year? Although even last year, like they had a really good stats against OpTic and struggled against Toronto, I believe, and where in previous years it was like they struggled against OpTic. So it's always like little coin tossy there with who they're able to uh, have success and who they struggle with at the top. But nonetheless, yeah, obviously this is just a team you expect to be in every single Sunday this year.
Yeah, I forget what the I remember us talking about it, but I think it was last year they were really good in search, but then not good in like the respawns, or like not good compared to like what they're used to. And
Or
then
yeah.
the previous season it was the opposite. They were struggling in S&D, and then they were good in the respawn. So like I don't know, like this they're playing on the edges. Like they're always, they're trying to be at the very top. So, we're kind of grading them on a curve. Like we don't talk about FaZe, and we won't talk about OpTic and LAT the same way we talk about like Boston. Like we don't expect the same things. So, we just have higher expectations of a team like FaZe. And then, let's talk about OpTic. They are the defending world champions. Obviously, OpTic, the most popular team. If you're just now tuning into competitive Call of Duty, I actually don't even need to explain what OpTic is, because that's probably why you are getting into competitive Call of Duty in the first place. But defending world champions, that alone makes me kind of hesitant to. I don't think either one of us picked OpTic to win champs, because I think you picked
Well, no,
FaZe.
they came in last at the event before chance.
Yeah. Yeah. They are. I was actually saying about this year, but now that I was thinking about
Oh,
it, like,
wow.
yeah, they were a dumpster fire right before they went on the best run they've had and won a world championship. But OpTic is hot and cold. They're hit or miss. If they have a 4-2 record, then for some OpTic fans, the sky is falling, and
Yep.
so the expectations from their own fan base are as high as they possibly can be. But the champs hangover seems pretty real. We've seen in the past that teams that won champs, sometimes they don't always last. They sometimes make the roster change, like we saw with New York heading into last season. But also some teams are just not able to kind of keep up that same level of consistency. And with OpTic, they really didn't have the same level of consistency that you would expect, especially late in the season. So I'm wondering, can they repeat? That's got to be the main thing. What do you think about this potential champs hangover for a team? And obviously, I think we have to mention no team has ever gone back to back. No actual 4-man team or the same organization has gone back to back. So what do you think?
I guess that's they're chasing history here, right?
Yeah,
And I think this is a squad that's capable of it. They really like all four guys, really talented. I mean, we even had like a whole podcast over the offseason dedicated to like ranking Kenny and Shotzi in terms of like top 10, top 15 COD players of
two-time
all
world
time.
champions.
It was really like that kind of like came out of nowhere. Like we weren't
Yeah,
planning on it, and it kind of just like evolved into like holy shit, like that's where these guys belong now after this run. And uh, obviously, just all four guys on the team, super talented. It's a team that, again, you expect to be every single Sunday, competing in multiple finals. Um, and it's the second year for this squad being together now. And obviously, we saw the roller coaster ride last year where they literally went from worst to first at last major and then champs. I would assume they're going to try to do whatever they can to avoid that first, that the first part of that roller coaster and just stay on, uh, you know, more towards the winning champ side of things. But for me, the other thing that probably isn't talked that much about is this is now second year of not only the squad being together, but it's Karma's second year as a coach. Obviously, he had success last year with being the coach and them getting their rings at champs, and so he's technically now Barlow or Damon 4 rings, I guess. But um, yeah, just like how is Karma able to evolve as a coach and continue to contribute to this team and have an impact? Obviously, again, he's one of the most talented COD players and one of the best Call of Duty minds and scenes. So expect him if the team does fall flat or struggle at points in the year, expect him to correct course pretty quickly. But yeah, overall, it's just a simple, I guess, the way you kind of phrased it, like, can this team make history and be the first team to repeat and go back to back at champs? Like, that's the expectation from the Green Wall. It's them winning everything is always the expectation for the Green Wall. So, yeah, why don't we see if they can go and make history?
history, legacy. That's what will kind of dominate OpTic's narrative, I guess. At least as we get closer to champs. But if you think about it, like I said, no team back to back, they would be the first. And then with Clayster's retirement, there's no longer an active 3-ring world champion in the CDL, not counting Karma, who is the coach. But Shotzi and Kenny have a chance this year if they win another world championship. They get 3 rings. Obviously, like I mentioned, FaZe has the potential for 3 rings with Simp and Abizi as well. But I mean, I'm just saying, if Kenny wins a 3rd ring, like he's close. Shotzi, he's not even a superstar, so I don't even know if we can put him in that discussion. And then, in all seriousness, if Karma and OpTic were to win a world championship, he's probably the greatest coach of all time. In addition to, many people think he's the greatest player of all time, which would be an insane thing to do, just in general. It's like Faker if he retired and then was like, actually, I'm going to coach like 3 more world championship teams with T1.